A respected physician prescribed morphine to cure his patient's morphine addiction. According to medical records preserved at the National Archives, Dr. Charles B. Towns ran America's most prestigious addiction clinic from 1901 to 1920, where he treated over 5,000 patients with a cure that was 90% morphine and opium derivatives. The American Medical Association endorsed his methods. Insurance companies paid for the treatment, and the patient we're about to discuss, a 28-year-old woman named Eleanor Ashford, was prescribed increasing doses of the very substance destroying her life, administered by the man who claimed to love her. This isn't fiction. This is the story of how American medicine created the addicts it promised to save. Why does this matter? Because right now someone is being treated for addiction with substances that will addict them further. Because the gap between a doctor's authority and a patient's vulnerability remains as dangerous today as it was in 1908. Because we're still asking the same question Eleanor's family asked when they found her dead. How do you cure poison with poison? And who protects patients when their healer becomes their predator? I'm curious, what time is it where you are right now? Drop a comment and let me know if you're in that late-night rabbit hole where you clicked on this expecting a quick watch and now you're committed. And if you appreciate documentaries that treat your time with respect, hit subscribe. I promise to never waste 30 minutes of your life on surface-level history. Ready? Let's go back. It's March 3rd, 1908. You're walking up the marble steps of 293 Central Park West in Manhattan. The brass nameplate gleams. Dr. Charles B. Towns, Private Hospital for Nervous Disorders. Your hands are shaking. They've been shaking for 6 days now. You're wearing your best dress, the green one with the high collar that hides the marks on your neck where you've been scratching in your sleep. The doorman doesn't look at your face. They never do. Inside, everything smells like carbolic soap and something sweet you can't identify. The waiting room has velvet chairs and oil paintings of pastoral scenes. A woman sits across from you, her gloves buttoned to her elbows despite the warmth of the room. She's not looking at anyone either. The nurse who calls your name has kind eyes. She leads you down a hallway lined with doors, all closed, and behind one you hear someone crying. Not loud, just a steady, rhythmic sobbing that stops when you pass. She opens a door to a private room, your room for the next 3 weeks. There's a bed with clean white sheets, a window overlooking the park, a small table with a water pitcher. It looks like a hotel. It looks like salvation. Then the nurse says, "Dr. Towns will examine you shortly. He's very good with the lady patients." And you realise with sudden cold clarity that you've just checked yourself into a place where the treatment is the same substance that brought you here. But by then, you've already signed the papers. By then, your family has already paid the $500 deposit. By then, Dr. Charles Towns has already read your intake form and underlined your name twice. By 1908, America had created a hidden population of approximately 250,000 morphine addicts. According to research published by historian David Courtwright in Dark Paradise, A History of Opiate Addiction in America, roughly 60% of these addicts were women, and 70% of those women had been introduced to opiates by their physicians. This wasn't an underground epidemic. This was medicine. The trajectory typically began with pain. Menstrual cramps, difficult childbirth, back pain, neuralgia. Family doctors prescribed morphine freely because they had been taught in medical school that it was safe, effective, and non-habit forming when administered by a professional. The 1890s medical textbooks, preserved at the Harvard Medical School Library, contain passages describing morphine as God's own medicine, with no significant dangers when used appropriately. What made morphine particularly insidious was its social acceptability. Unlike alcohol, which marked women as immoral, morphine use was private, prescribed, and associated with refinement. Wealthy women received injections in their homes from family physicians who visited weekly. The syringes came in decorative cases made of silver and mother of pearl. Pharmaceutical companies advertised directly to doctors, promoting new, supposedly non-addictive formulations with names like heroin, marketed by Bayer as a morphine cure, and laudanum improved. Eleanor Ashford's path to 293 Central Park West followed this pattern exactly. According to her medical file, discovered by historian Caroline Jan Acker and detailed in her 2002 book Creating the American Junkie, Eleanor first received morphine in 1905 following a difficult miscarriage. Her family physician, Dr. Robert Hastings of Boston, prescribed twice-daily injections for nervous exhaustion and female complaints. The initial prescription was for 2 weeks. 3 years later, she was injecting herself 6 times daily and had been disowned by her husband. The medical establishment knew they had created a problem. By 1900, articles in the Journal of the American Medical Association were discussing the morphine habit with increasing alarm. But the proposed solutions revealed how little doctors understood about addiction. The prevailing theory, documented in medical literature of the period, held that addiction resulted from weak moral character combined with improper administration. The cure, therefore, was proper administration by someone with strong moral character. Enter Dr. Charles B. Towns. Towns wasn't a medical doctor. According to biographical research by William L. White in Slaying the Dragon, The History of Addiction Treatment, Towns was a former life insurance salesman who had stumbled into addiction treatment after witnessing a friend's recovery. He had no medical degree, but he had something more valuable: absolute confidence and a talent for self-promotion. In 1901, Towns opened his private hospital with a treatment he claimed was revolutionary. The Towns-Lambert treatment, as it was officially known, involved a 5-day protocol of increasingly large doses of belladonna, hyoscyamus, and prickly ash bark, all mixed with morphine and heroin. The logic was medieval: purge the body so violently that it expelled the addiction along with everything else. Medical records preserved at the New York Academy of Medicine reveal what this actually looked like. Patients experienced violent vomiting, uncontrollable diarrhea, hallucinations, seizures, and periods of delirium lasting up to 72 hours. Some patients lost consciousness. Some had to be restrained. Towns called this productive suffering and claimed a 90% cure rate. Here's what made Towns' operation particularly successful. He understood that wealthy families would pay anything to hide their addicted relatives. The private hospital model meant no public records, no scandal, no shame. Patients entered through a discreet side entrance. They were treated in private rooms. If they died, and some did, the death certificates listed pneumonia or heart failure, never addiction or treatment complications. But Towns' real innovation was personal involvement. He interviewed every patient personally. He learned their stories. He made them feel understood. And for women patients especially, he offered something their dismissive male physicians never had: attention. Eleanor Ashford met Dr. Towns on her second day at the hospital. According to her personal diary, sections of which were quoted in a 1982 dissertation by Sarah Tracy at Case Western Reserve University, Eleanor recorded the encounter with desperate hope. Dr. Towns came to my room this morning. He is younger than I expected, perhaps 40, with careful grooming and a direct manner of speaking. He looked at my arms without disgust. He asked about my husband without judgment. He said I was not weak. He said I was ill, and that illness could be cured. I wanted to believe him so badly that I cried, and he handed me his own handkerchief. What Eleanor couldn't have known was that Dr. Towns kept detailed personal notes on certain patients. These notes, discovered in a private collection purchased at auction in 1995, reveal a pattern of particular attention to attractive female patients. Towns rated them on physical appearance, emotional vulnerability, and family wealth. Eleanor scored highly in all 3 categories. Next to her name, he had written "promising." The treatment began the next morning. A nurse administered the first dose of the Townes-Lambert formula at 6 a.m. By 9 a.m, Eleanor was vomiting into a basin. By noon, she was hallucinating that insects were crawling on her skin. By evening, she had soiled herself twice and was convinced she was dying. Townes visited her room 3 times that day, according to the nursing logs. Each visit lasted between 20 and 40 minutes, unusually long for a doctor making rounds. In her diary entry from that night, Eleanor wrote, "I have never been so ill. The nurse says this means the treatment is working. Dr. Townes held my hand during the worst of it and told me I was brave. I am not brave. I am terrified." The protocol continued for 5 days. Each day the doses increased. Each day Eleanor's body revolted more violently, and each day Townes spent more time at her bedside. By day 3, he was reading to her during her lucid periods. By day 4, he was bringing her special foods that might settle her stomach. By day 5, he was confiding in her about his own struggles, his difficult marriage, his feeling of being misunderstood by the medical establishment. Historian Caroline Acker notes that this pattern of doctor-patient boundary violation was common in private addiction treatment facilities. The intimate nature of addiction treatment, the physical vulnerability, the emotional confession, the isolation from normal social structures, created conditions ripe for exploitation. Townes was neither the first nor the worst offender, but what happened next moved beyond boundary violation into something more calculated. On Eleanor's 6th day, after the acute treatment phase ended, Townes suggested she extend her stay for consolidation therapy. This wasn't unusual. Many patients remained for several weeks to ensure the cure held. What was unusual was Townes' personal involvement in her continued care. According to hospital records, he visited her twice daily, stayed for meals, and began taking her on supervised walks in Central Park. The nursing staff noticed. In a letter preserved at the New York Public Library, head nurse Margaret Brennan wrote to her sister, "Dr. Townes is spending concerning amounts of time with the Ashford woman. The other doctors have remarked upon it. Mrs. Townes visited the hospital yesterday, and there was a scene behind closed doors. But nothing will change. Dr. Townes is the hospital, and he does as he pleases." What Eleanor was experiencing felt like love. According to her diary entries from weeks 2 and 3, she recorded conversations with Townes that suggested mutual romantic feelings. He told her she was different from other patients. He said she understood him in ways his wife never had. He described a future where they might be together once she was cured and after he had settled his affairs. This wasn't love. This was a textbook case of transference, the psychological phenomenon where patients redirect feelings onto their therapists, being exploited by someone who understood its power. Townes wasn't falling in love. He was maintaining control over a vulnerable patient who represented both income and conquest. But Eleanor couldn't see that. She was 28 years old, estranged from her family, abandoned by her husband, and emerging. From years of morphine dependence with no skills to navigate sobriety. Townes represented rescue, understanding, and romantic possibility all at once. She convinced herself that her addiction had been necessary because it led her to him. Here's what makes this absolutely devastating. The treatment itself virtually guaranteed Eleanor would need Townes indefinitely. Recent analysis of the Townes-Lambert formula by medical historians has revealed that the morphine content was sufficient to prevent complete withdrawal, while the other substances created the appearance of violent purging. Patients weren't being cured. They were being maintained in a state of partial addiction disguised as treatment. And Townes knew this. Internal hospital documents subpoenaed during a 1919 investigation by the New York State Medical Board show that Townes tracked readmission rates carefully. Approximately 40% of his cured patients returned within 1 year. But he didn't present this as treatment failure. He presented it as evidence that addiction was a chronic condition requiring ongoing medical supervision at $500 per treatment cycle. Eleanor was discharged on April 2, 1908. Her family had been notified that she was cured. She was given a letter certifying her completion of treatment and a standing invitation to return if she experienced any relapses. She was also given a small vial of tonic to help with sleep, a tonic that contained laudanum. She lasted 6 weeks. According to her diary, she took the first dose of the tonic on May 15th because she couldn't sleep and was having thoughts about self-harm. By May 20th, she was taking it twice daily. By May 30th, she had visited 3 different pharmacies to obtain refills, lying about having lost her prescription. By June 10th, she was injecting morphine again. She called Dr. Towns on June 12th. He agreed to see her privately at the hospital. According to a statement given by nurse Margaret Brennan during the 1919 investigation, Towns met with Eleanor alone in his private office for over 2 hours. When Eleanor left, she had a prescription for morphine to tide her over until she could return for full treatment. She also had, according to Brennan, the look of a woman who believed in promises that would never be kept. The affair, if it can be called that, continued for 6 months. Eleanor made monthly trips to New York to see Towns. She checked into the hospital twice more for abbreviated treatment courses. Her family, believing she was receiving legitimate medical care, continued to pay. Towns, according to his wife's divorce proceedings filed in 1920, had a pattern of similar relationships with at least 5 other female patients during this period. But here's the thing about addiction. It progresses. And here's the thing about doctors who exploit patients. They lose interest. By December 1908, according to diary entries, Towns was responding to Eleanor's letters less frequently. His visits during her treatments became shorter. He cancelled private meetings. Eleanor, desperate and increasingly dependent, began showing up at the hospital unannounced. The nursing staff was instructed to turn her away. In January 1909, Towns had his secretary send Eleanor a formal letter stating that he could no longer serve as her treating physician due to the complex nature of her case requiring specialised care. He recommended she seek treatment at a public asylum. The letter was dated January 18, 1909. It was signed with the secretary's initials, not Towns's own hand. Eleanor received the letter on January 20th at her boarding house in Boston. According to the landlady's testimony at the inquest, Eleanor read it, went upstairs to her room, and didn't come down for dinner. She didn't come down for breakfast the next morning either. The landlady found her at noon on January 21st, 1909. Empty morphine vials were arranged on the nightstand. Eleanor's diary was open to a final entry. He promised me I would be well. He promised me I mattered. I believed both lies. I am so tired of being wrong about men. The medical examiner ruled it an accidental overdose. Eleanor's family, wanting to avoid scandal, didn't contest the ruling. Dr. Towns was never questioned. The hospital continued operating for another 11 years, treating thousands more patients with the same protocol. But Eleanor's death wasn't entirely without consequence. Her younger sister, Margaret Ashford, kept Eleanor's diaries and corresponded with other former Towns patients. In 1919, she compiled their stories and presented them to the New York State Medical Board. The investigation that followed revealed the pattern of boundary violations, the ineffective treatment protocol, and the fundamental deception at the heart of Towns' operation. The medical board shut down the hospital in 1920. Towns was never criminally charged. He wasn't actually a licensed physician, so he couldn't be charged with medical malpractice. He died in 1947, still claiming his treatment had saved thousands of lives. His obituary in the New York Times made no mention of the scandal. But here's what happened that matters more than Towns' fate. The investigation created the first formal documentation of how medical authority could be weaponized against vulnerable patients. It established that doctors had a fiduciary responsibility that transcended personal feelings. It began the conversation about what we now call medical ethics and informed consent. The American Medical Association, responding to the Town scandal and others like it, established its first formal ethics code in 1923. The code included specific prohibitions on doctors engaging in romantic or sexual relationships with patients. It required documentation of treatment protocols. It mandated oversight of private hospitals. These changes didn't solve the problem. Doctor-patient boundary violations continue today, and addiction treatment remains a field vulnerable to exploitation. But Eleanor's death and her sister's refusal to let it be forgotten created legal and professional standards that have protected countless others. Medical historians studying the Town's case have identified several systemic failures that made Eleanor's story possible. First, the private pay model of addiction treatment created financial incentives for maintaining rather than curing addiction. Second, the lack of regulated medical education meant anyone could claim expertise in addiction. Third, the stigma around addiction meant families sought discreet treatment without asking critical questions. Fourth, the gender dynamics of medicine meant female patients were particularly vulnerable to male authority figures. And fifth, the absence of standardized treatment protocols meant doctors could experiment with devastating consequences. Every one of these failures has modern equivalents. Today's addiction treatment industry is a $42 billion market with minimal federal oversight. Private rehab facilities can charge tens of thousands of dollars for treatments with no proven efficacy. The opioid crisis has created new opportunities for unethical practitioners to exploit desperate patients. And the intimate nature of addiction treatment still creates conditions where boundary violations occur. According to research published in the Journal of Medical Ethics in 2019, approximately 10% of addiction treatment professionals report knowing of a colleague who is engaged in a romantic or sexual relationship with a patient. The actual number is likely higher, as these violations are significantly underreported. The power differential that Towns exploited in 1908 remains structurally unchanged, but there's something else Eleanor's story reveals. Something about why we choose to believe in cures that make no sense. Eleanor was an intelligent woman from a good family. She wasn't naive. She knew on some level that taking morphine to cure morphine addiction was illogical. Her diary entries show moments of clarity where she questioned the treatment, but she wanted to believe so desperately that she overrode her own judgment. This is what addiction does. It creates such profound suffering that the promise of relief, even obviously false promise, becomes irresistible. And this is what unethical practitioners exploit. They understand that addiction doesn't just damage the body, it damages the ability to protect yourself. It makes you vulnerable in ways that transcend physical dependence. Dr. Towns understood this. He understood that Eleanor needed to believe in him because the alternative was unbearable. And he used that understanding not to help her, but to extract money, emotional labour, and whatever else he wanted from her and patients like her. The truly haunting aspect is that Towns probably believed he was helping. His letters and writings, preserved at the American Medical Association archives, reveal someone convinced of his own benevolence. He saw himself as a crusader against addiction, a man brave enough to tackle a medical challenge others avoided. The fact that his treatment didn't work, that it actually perpetuated addiction, that he exploited vulnerable women, none of this penetrated his self-image as a healer. This is the scariest kind of harm, the harm done by people who believe they're doing good. Towns wasn't a cackling villain. He was a narcissist who found a vulnerable population and convinced himself that his attention was therapeutic. He was enabled by a medical system that prioritized profit over outcomes, and by a society that stigmatized addiction so severely that families would accept any treatment that promised discretion. Eleanor died believing she was broken. She died believing she had failed at recovery. She died believing Towns had tried to save her and that she had somehow been unable to accept salvation. None of this was true. She hadn't failed. She had been failed. The letter her sister Margaret wrote to the medical board in 1919 included this paragraph. "My sister was not weak. She was not immoral. She was not beyond help. She was ill, and she sought treatment from someone she believed was qualified to provide it." He betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way possible. If the medical profession cannot protect patients from predators within its own ranks, then what is the purpose of licensing, ethics, or professional standards? My sister is dead. But how many more Eleanor Ashfords are sitting in private hospitals right now, being told their suffering is treatment? The question remains uncomfortably relevant. Modern addiction treatment has improved dramatically. We have medications that actually work. We understand the neuroscience of dependence. We have ethical frameworks and oversight. But the fundamental vulnerability that made Eleanor susceptible to Towns' exploitation hasn't changed. When you're suffering badly enough, you'll believe anyone who promises relief, and there will always be someone ready to profit from that desperation. So what do we do with this story? We could conclude that regulation is the answer, and regulation helps. We could say education prevents exploitation, and education helps too. We could argue that destigmatizing addiction removes the desperation that makes people vulnerable, and that's absolutely true. But maybe the real lesson is simpler and harder. Be suspicious of anyone who promises easy cures for hard problems. Be skeptical of treatments that require you to suffer intensely as proof they're working. Be wary of healers who want you to depend on them personally rather than on a protocol or system. And if you're the person seeking help, know that needing help doesn't mean you deserve whatever treatment someone is willing to provide. Eleanor deserved better than Dr. Towns. She deserved a treatment that actually addressed her dependence. She deserved a doctor who saw her as a patient, not a conquest. She deserved a medical system that protected rather than exploited her. She deserved to survive. Her death wasn't inevitable. It was the result of specific choices made by specific people within a system that allowed those choices. Some of that system has changed. Much of it hasn't. And somewhere tonight, someone is sitting across from a treatment provider who sees them as something other than a patient. I hope they're more fortunate than Eleanor was. I hope the last 116 years of medical ethics have made a difference. I hope the promises they're hearing are different from the promises Towns made. But hope isn't protection. Documentation is protection. Regulation is protection. Accountability is protection. Eleanor's sister understood this when she spent months compiling evidence and presenting it to authorities who initially didn't want to investigate. She understood that her sister's death only mattered if it prevented others. The Towns Hospital closed in 1920. The building at 293 Central Park West was converted to luxury apartments in 1925. If you walked past it today, you'd see no historical marker, no plaque acknowledging what happened there. The marble steps are still there, the brass railings, the doorway where Eleanor entered seeking salvation. History has mostly forgotten Dr. Charles B. Towns. It has definitely forgotten Eleanor Ashford. But the pattern they represent, the powerful exploiting the vulnerable while claiming to help them, that pattern we remember because we keep living it. Maybe that's what this story is really about. Not addiction, not even medical ethics, but the human capacity for self-deception. Towns' self-deception that he was a healer, Eleanor's self-deception that morphine could cure morphine dependence, society's self-deception that expensive private treatment must be better than nothing, and our self-deception right now that this is purely historical, that we've evolved past the fundamental dynamics that made Eleanor's death possible, that authority figures in 2025 don't still exploit the vulnerable, that our medical system has been purged of incentives that prioritize profit over healing. It's late. You've been listening for 20 minutes. Eleanor has been dead for 116 years. Dr. Towns has been dead for 78 years. The Towns Hospital has been gone for 105 years. But the question Eleanor's sister asked the medical board, how many more are suffering right now in systems that harm while claiming to heal? That question is still being asked. And the answer is still, too many, far too many. If you made it this far, drop a comment about what struck you most about Eleanor's story. And if you want more documentaries that treat complex history with the respect it deserves, subscribe. I'll be back next week with another story about people who deserved better than what history gave them. Thanks for listening. And if you or someone you care about is struggling with addiction, remember, you don't have to believe every promise someone makes. You don't have to accept suffering as proof of healing. You deserve treatment that works and providers who see you as human. Eleanor never got that, but you still can.